welcome to episode 5 of Musical Reflections of a Slightly Conscious Being. I'm Sandra, a music artist that is on a journey towards consciousness. And today we are going to talk about something that, a theme that is very dear to me. So all themes that I've been presenting here so far are themes that I've worked in the last years of my life. But this one is, I think it's the dearest, the closest to my heart. It's not dearest because it's not a positive theme, but it's a work that I've been doing, and I do feel it's one of the things that helped me the most on my healing journey and my conscious journey, and it's dealing with generational trauma. So actually, I will share the song that I'm going to share today is called Stubborn. The initial plan, I didn't include this song, didn't include the song Stubborn. But I wanted to include it because I do feel it's so important, and it's the only song I have that talks very clearly about generational trauma. And by the way, what is generational trauma? It's basically trauma that perpetuates itself towards generations. So usually behavior that we experienced with our parents, well, our close family, but usually it's our parents, and that we have a tendency to repeat because that's how trauma perpetuates itself. It's through repetition. And then, as I mentioned before, there are two parts. There are the active part or the passive part. They are both needed for the trauma to perpetuate itself. But usually people only focus on the active part. So just to give you an example, so there's an active and a passive part. So usually when we're talking, for instance, about physical violence, it's easy to understand that there's an abuser and the person that is the victim that allows herself or himself to be subject to that violence. Okay, so they are both needed, and they are both part of the process of passing along trauma. And of course, if you grow up in a home that you experienced or you witnessed physical violence, you have a tendency to become either an abuser or a victim. So this is the extreme case of physical violence, but this is actually the process that happens even in milder forms of violence, like psychological violence, for instance, or other forms of trauma, like screaming, shouting, or whatever it is. Physical distance, and we've talked about emotional manipulation forms as giving the silent treatment. If you grew up in a house that you saw your parents giving the silent treatment to each other, you will have a tendency of either doing the same and becoming the active, or tolerating the same, and that's being the passive form of the equation. It's as needed as the active one. All right, so I'm going to start with my song Stubborn. It has always been like this, not something you can deny. You and I were so fine together. Your looks and your ways that caught my eyes. We've been together since life forever. Satisfied, had to ruin everything. I never get to do something right. Why I always need to start a fight. I'm sorry, but I'm stubborn. Sorry, but I'm stubborn. that's alright. I've always been overreactive. Sorry, but that's from that aside. I've always known that I want everything my way. Everything in the right place always made my day. It's not something you can change. I'm sorry, but I'm stubborn. I'm sorry, but I'm stubborn. Why do things get like this? I'm sorry, but that's not something you can change. I'd rather be something else. I'm sorry, but I'm stubborn. I'm sorry, but I'm stubborn. Sorry, but I'm stubborn. So there you go, guys. That was my song Stubborn. And I think it's actually the oldest song I'm presenting on the Eternal series of these lives. This song was actually written 9 years ago. Yeah, true story. It was before I started working on myself. So it's actually interesting to see that even though I haven't started working on myself and on my healing journey, I remember the exact moment when I wrote this song. And this song was written in like 10 minutes, not 10 seconds, not that fast yet. One day. And I was actually taking my degree, of my mechanical engineer degree, and I was waiting. We were going to do a video call because we were doing a group work, and I was there waiting, and the other guys were late, and so I had some free time. And during those 10 minutes that I was waiting for the other guys to arrive, I wrote this song. Sorry about that. Okay. So, it was written 9 years ago, a long time ago. But it's also interesting to see that I was already aware of some of my flaws and traumas as a person, but I had that posture that, well, that's the way that I am. There's nothing I can do about it. So I have this idea that traumas or these flaws were something that were part of me, and they were an immutable part of me. There was something that's not subject to change. And most of my songs, this is not the only song that I have that I wrote before my healing journey has begun. My healing journey, so this song was 9 years ago, and my healing journey, or my journey towards consciousness, started around 7 years ago. It was a bit before I became a musician full-time. I do feel what allowed me to become a musician full-time was actually working on myself and realizing that no, you can always change your life. You can always change the parts of you that you don't like. So, but most of the songs that were written before that have that idea of never changing the way I am. And of course, you guys can remember Carry On. Carry On has, I will never change the way I am. So Carry On was written... Carry On was one of my first songs. 13 years ago, 13, 14 years ago, something like that. So yeah. Also that idea of immutability or immutability, I don't know how to say, of something that cannot be changed. So Guido is saying, very good song. Thank you so much, Guido. So, thing is, sometimes we see our flaws, and on this song I do feel like I mentioned my flaws. It's a happy song, so I mentioned my flaws in a happy way, in an accepting way, which is actually good. It's good to accept your flaws, but you shouldn't see your flaws as something positive, because if they are flaws, it's something that maybe you should work on, right? So which part of yourself, and there's this saying, stay true to yourself, right? Many people say this, stay true to yourself, but which part of yourself do you want to stay true to? Do you want to stay true to your shortcomings, to your trauma parts, to your shadow side? I don't think so, right? So it's a balance. When you say to someone, stay true to yourself, which yourself are you talking to? Because we are complex beings. We have many things and many feelings and many parts inside of us, and we all have shadow parts that we are not proud of. And it's amazing and it's great to recognize that you have that part inside of you, that you have those flaws. But that's just the first step. It's recognizing that you have those flaws. The next step is working on them. So let's start with the lyrics. And today I'm going to split the lyrics. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing I always do. I will speak the lyrics all at once, and then I will analyze in two parts. So let's do this. I've always known that I'm obsessive, but I've always thought that that's all right. I've always been a little crazy. Sorry, but that's from my mama's side. It has always been like this. It's not something you can deny. Now, you and I were so fine together. Your looks and your ways have caught my eyes. We've been together since like forever, but it seems I'm never satisfied. I have to ruin everything. I never get to do something right. Why I always need to start a fight. I'm sorry, but I'm stubborn. I've always known that I'm the picky kind, but I've always thought that that's all right. I've always been overreactive. Sorry, but that's from daddy's side. I've always known that I want everything my way. Everything on the right place always made my day. It's not something you can change. I'm sorry, but I'm stubborn. Why do things get like this? I'm sorry, but that's not something you can change. I'll rather be something else. I'm sorry, but I'm stubborn. So there you go. A lot of, well, I'm sorry, but that's the way I am. Which is not a great way to apologize, because if you are apologizing, but then you say, well, but that's the way things are and there's nothing I can do about that. That's not really a real apology, is it? Right? So I'm sorry, but, and when true sorries don't have buts in front of them, and I know that sounds wrong. Where's Hambo when we need them, when we need him? But you guys know what I mean. Okay. And maybe now you are beginning to understand why I wanted to include this song here, because it does have a lot of subjects, and the lyrics are has a lot of interesting things. And so in the beginning, when I say, I've always known that I'm obsessive, but I've always thought that that's all right. I've always been a little crazy. Sorry, but that's from mama's side. It has always been like this. It's not something you can deny. So in here, I talk about some points about me that I was already aware of, like being obsessive, and how I always thought that that was all right until I started to notice the problems that being like that was causing in my life. And in this case, I'm talking about my former relationship as well. I also thought about being a little crazy, and that being from my mom's side. So my mom suffers from bipolar disorder, and she has schizophrenic tendencies. And I don't know if you guys know this, but being a daughter of a bipolar mother, being a daughter of a bipolar parent, I have 80% more probability of developing bipolar disorder at some point in my life. And bipolar disorder can appear at any age. So my mom start manifesting some symptoms of her disease when she was only 16, but I've heard people developing the disease after 30, after 40, so it's very relative. It can appear at any point in a person's life. And for a very, very long time in my life, I was really, really scared that that could happen to me, that I could start developing some symptoms of that disease or disorder. When I say disease or disorder, for me they mean it. I know it has, the meaning is slightly different. For me it's the same thing. It's something that it's not quite right in your body or in your mind. It's a disease or a disorder. So I'm just clarifying that. So now I really don't mind about that anymore. I feel in a very safe place mentally and emotionally. and I deal with my feelings and thoughts in a very open way. So I don't really think that would ever happen. But even if it does, it's something that it's totally out of my control. So why should I worry about it, right? It's like raining. It's like worrying for something that you don't know if it's coming or not. I mean, you have absolutely no control over it. The only thing I can do is taking good care of myself, of my mind and my body. And that's what I do already. And the rest, well, who can tell, right? Stig, happy Friday. Thank you so much for the super chat. So on these lyrics, I also state that I was always like this, which is an excuse most of us use, right? Oh, well, I was always like this. Like, why are you trying to change me? I was already like this when we met. We all heard that or said that, right? But always being a certain way doesn't mean we cannot change ourselves or compromise, okay? There's always time, and everything in this universe changes. The only constant that we have is change. So some things just have longer cycles than others, but everything comes in cycles. If you think about it, even the universe is in a cycle right now. It's expanding, so it's in a cycle, and it's changing. So everything changes. So even though things appear very solid, everything changes. So we can also change. So moving on with the lyrics. Now you and I were so fine together. Your looks and your ways have caught my eyes. We've been together since like forever, but it seems I'm never satisfied. I have to ruin everything. I never get to do something right. Why I always need to start a fight. So again, there's awareness here. So this time of being, on a relationship for a very long time, but always feeling like something was missing. So I was never satisfied. And this is, I've talked about ego before, and this is a very ego sentence, never being satisfied, always feeling like something external is missing. So that's a symptom of looking for satisfaction outside of you. Of course, you'll never be satisfied, because satisfaction can only come from within and never from outside. So there's also accountability here, though, because I admit that I have a tendency to start fights, which I used to do a lot, but it's exaggerated in a way that I take the blame for it like 100%. Like, I have to ruin everything. I never get to do something right. This is really, really extreme negative, and of course it's not constructive at all. It's taking the blame 100% when a fight happens, it needs two people, right? So it's just going over the top. Like, it's not healthy either. Patrick, welcome. And so then I say, I'm sorry, but I'm stubborn. I'm sorry, but I'm stubborn. And so this is an interesting sentence, like I said, because in one way, yes, I'm apologizing. I'm saying I'm sorry, but it's an apology with a but, which means it's not a real apology, because it's like saying I'm sorry, but there's nothing I can do about it. And that's not a real apology. And then we have, I've always known that I'm the picky kind, but I've always thought that that's all right. I've always been overreactive. Sorry, but that's from Daddy's side. I've always known that I want everything my way, everything on the right place, always made my day. It's not something you can change. So here's, again, more points I'm aware of, like being picky, and I was extremely I still am extremely picky, but now I don't impose that pickiness on others, because I'm a very picky person, and I like to have things and to do things a certain way. And I've talked about some things like that. And so I used to have a special spoon for cereals and a special spoon for eating chocolate milk. Actually, I don't have those spoons with me right now. And now I'm using others, and that's fine as well. So I don't have like, it has to be with those spoons, but I like to do things a certain way. And I used to try to impose that towards others. And that's the problem. When you try to impose your things and things you like to do a certain way to others, that's the problem. And always wanting everything my way as well. So yeah. But I also mentioned that it's not something you can change. So again, I'm looking at my shortcomings as something that it's not possible to change. So I also mentioned another generational trauma, and this time I talk about being overreactive, which is my dad is extremely overreactive, and we've talked about this. We've talked about this here, and he still sees it as something that he cannot change. So it's easy to see why for a very long time I was like that, and I thought that also that was something that I couldn't change. And then I say again, I'm sorry, but I'm stubborn. And then, why do things get like this? I'm sorry, but that's not something you can change. I'll rather be something else. So in here, this is an interesting part, because on one side, I do question, like, why do things get like this? And when I say why do things get like this, it's probably because I was me and my former partner, we were again bumping heads with each other. Nothing new. And then I say, I'm sorry, but that's not something you can change. Again, see, and it's something like, even though I mentioned that I'd rather be something else, so I would rather not be like this, but in the end, I still see it as something that, well, there's nothing I can do about that, and things are like this, and there's nothing we can do. So this leads us, and you see why I wanted to include this song, because I mentioned and I admit so many things about me that I knew that were shortcomings, and I knew that were causing issues for myself and on my former relationship. So today, again, we are going to talk about generational trauma, and that's what this song is all about. So this subject is very close to my heart. It's something that I've been working on the past 2 years. It's basically understanding patterns that perpetuate themselves generation after generation. Working on generational trauma invites us to look deep within ourselves and our families, to look for behavior patterns, and to have the humility of recognizing those patterns within us, in our life choices and in our interactions. So being overreactive was definitely one of my most flagrant generational traumas. Taking the blame in extreme for things that were out of my control, or okay, they were part my fault, but they were not exclusively my fault, was another form of generational trauma. There was also a tendency of carrying the blame for things that happened a long time ago. Again, also a form of generational trauma. Keep blaming ourselves for things or situations that happened that we cannot change, but we still carry those things inside of us. That is a lot from my dad's side. And being anxious and being obsessive and even neurotic about the future, now it's not about the past, about the future, was another form of generational trauma. And this time is on my mother's side of the family. So it's interesting to see, and I'm laughing. Of course, I'm smiling because this is not funny at all. But it's interesting to see that from my father's side of the family, I inherit a tendency of reliving the past and keep with resentment and blame. And from my mother's side, I inherited a tendency of looking to the future with fear, doubt, and negativity. So this explains why I lived a big part of my life stuck between these two illusions, which is past and future. And meanwhile, in the present moment, which is the only real moment we have and where we can actively take any form of action, I kept being stuck on situations that weren't what I wanted for me at all. And I kept being stuck acting in ways that I know they weren't productive, and they were just keeping the trauma alive. And I spent a long time overthinking, and I still have a tendency to overthink. And that's also part of my personality, being talking about MBTI personalities, being an INFJ. I do have a very strong tendency to overthink. My mind is very active. It's just the way my brain works. I'm constantly thinking. So now I tend to focus on constructive thinking and not so much in reliving the past and the future, but I still relive the past and try to predict the future, but in constructive ways. So trying to learn from the past and trying to predict the future, but without getting stuck on all those emotions and all those things that we can change. But it's a challenge. It's a life challenge. So what happens when these patterns or conditioned programs run our lives is just we keep making the same actions and we keep making the same mistakes over and over again. And on Eastern cultures, this is actually called karma. And I know that for us here in the West, karma sometimes is seen as something more spiritual and as something that you believe in karma or you don't believe in karma. It's also seen as a form of divine punishment that only makes sense if you believe in a higher entity, call it God or whatever you like. But if you think about it, aren't these unconscious patterns that tend to repeat themselves, being them caused by generational trauma or any other form of trauma, aren't they a form of karma? Because many times people think karma is the same thing as fate, but it's not. Okay, karma, according, and this is Wikipedia, guys, is a principle of cause and effect, which states that the intent and actions of an individual, which are the cause, influence the future of that individual, which is the effect, cause and effect. So isn't this very similar to the way trauma perpetuates itself? Because someone does something to someone else, right? Parents act a certain way with their children. Children learn that behavior by being subject to them. And as they grow, they'll have a tendency of behaving the same way towards others, including, of course, their children. Cause and effect. Trauma perpetuates itself by cause and effect, just like stated by karmic law. Guido is saying Vegeta doesn't care about karma. No, she doesn't. And she's already on the position to kill the lights at any second, guys. So, once we realize this, that it's a cause and effect, it's easy to see the importance of facing our traumas. Not only here we are talking about generational traumas, but any kind of trauma, really. Only by facing them, we can break free from them. So only by recognizing these patterns that have been imposed on us, programmed on us, we can consciously choose to do differently, to behave differently, and to break the chain. We have to break the chain, right? So very soon after I ended my past relationship, and this is something I don't think I ever shared here, but very, very soon after I ended my past relationship, I went through a stage that I started dating right away. I felt like I was broken. I think I was in denial, so I just thought, okay, I'll start dating right away. And I met someone else like only a month after. And of course, now I know I was trying to suppress the pain, not allowing the grieving process. But anyway, the very first date I went, I met this really great guy. And we had a very good conversation. We spent a lot of time together. And, but, you know, then he tried to make a move on me. And I had this, it was so embarrassing because I had this really deep emotional reaction. And it was so strong that I started to cry. And because I immediately felt that I wasn't ready and that I just needed to be by myself. I couldn't be with anyone else for a while. So I felt really embarrassed. The guy, he was charming. He was a gentleman, and he understood. You know, it was a really emotional moment for me. And I feel very blessed to have been with someone that allowed me that and gave me space and totally never made me feel bad about it. But, you know, truth is today I feel so grateful for having had that reaction. Because I was clearly not ready to dive into another relationship. And if I had done it, I would probably end up having the same issues that I had before, because that's what happens when you don't heal. You just go ahead and you make the same mistakes and you bump your head again. And so I still had to grieve. I still had to work on my issues. And so I chose to face my traumas and to face myself. And I chose to find myself first. And finding yourself on your own, I have to say, it was one of the greatest challenges of my life. For the very first time, not having anyone to blame. Because when I was on that relationship, and I've mentioned this before, I've never been alone. Before that, I was living with my parents, and I was still living with my parents when I started my former relationship. And then I was always with that person, even during the times that there were times that we broke up. But even the times that we broke up, we kept in touch with each other. And so I was never by myself. And it was a huge challenge, and it was painful. Yes, it was painful, especially when I realized that I wasn't on the relationship, but I was still keeping the relationship very much alive in my head and in my thoughts. So it took me a while. It took me months, and to be on a healthy place. And I feel like I only started to be on a more healthy place 3 months ago. If yeah, more or less. I think it was pretty much 3 months ago that I started feeling more within myself, more in a sense at peace with myself, and at peace with everything. Of course, there are waves, and I don't think no one can say there's a point that suddenly you're healed and sometimes the grief is over. Feelings come in waves, and this is actually a realization that I had with a spiritual friend of mine once. That we were discussing something, and um, I was really deeply relaxed, and I have these amazing reflective sentences that come out of me somewhere that I can't even explain. And he was mentioning emotional echoes, because that's usually the expression they use, because emotions come in highs and lows. They say echoes, because there are parts sometimes you're fine, and then suddenly it comes another wave, or so echoes or waves. And my engineering side immediately recognized, oh, that's a wave. So it's in waves. And immediately I start saying, yeah, but that makes sense, because on the universe everything comes in waves. Light travels in waves, sound travels in waves. So we see it as, what we see as constant is actually our brain that stabilizes, has an internal stabilizer that stabilizes the signal. So when you see these lights, you see them orange, and you see them constant, but they are not constant. They are pulsing. So it was interesting for me to recognize that emotions and sometimes even behavioral patterns that you're trying to break, sometimes they also come in waves. There are times that you are more aware, and so you can make progress, but then you take one step back, and so it's just like that. It's 2 steps forwards and 1 step back, and that's normal. That's how progress goes. The important part is, when you take a step back, don't see it as negative. See it as part of the process, because there are many people who get like, oh, I'm not moving fast enough, or oh, I'm taking a step back, I'm not doing this right. You are. It's just the normal part of the process. So of course, sometimes there's a wave that comes, but the main thing is recognizing that the waves are getting lower and lower. I have a lot more highs than lows, and when I have a low, it's not that bad as it was months ago. So what happened 3 months ago is that I started recognizing that I was having a lot more highs than lows, and when I had a low, it wasn't that bad. So that's how you heal, and that's how healing happens. And of course, it's painful, but what's more painful in the end? Is it being alone, facing your demons, and coming out as a better person and ready to love in a whole different level? Because of course, what I allowed to happen in my life in the past, for the version I am right now, it's impossible. I could never allow myself to behave like I did, and I could never allow to be with someone that behaved the way that person did. So of course, I'm ready to love on a whole different level now. So what's more painful, is to go through the process and then coming out as a better person, or spending your life falling victim of your patterns over and over again? And that's it for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed it.